I've gotten a lot of questions lately concerning the load sequence on this gun. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is at least the way I like to load it or prefer to load it, especially when you're dealing with smaller shells. One of the first things to consider when loading this is we're going to feed the tube right here. And one of the things that I like to do is keep my hand in this position. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just hold that shell right there with the fingers. Now I know that in some cases, if you put the shell in just a little bit further, sometimes it'll stick, okay? And it'll stay for you a little bit. But if you start doing and applying a lot of speed, you're trying to do this on the move, what I generally will find out, or what I've found out is it doesn't always stay there, and sometimes it pops back out, and we want to avoid that, of course, mainly because we're usually limited in capacity. By holding it here and not taking my thumb and shoving it all the way forward, what I'm doing is I'm limiting that motion, which means I'm going to use the next shell, come in and push that shell halfway. And the whole time I'm doing this, it's in an effort to avoid having to stick my thumb in that 4 or 5 times. The last time is when I'm going to now seat that round all the way into the magazine tube. And again, what this does is it just saves the tip of your thumb. Instead of doing it once, twice, 3, 4, 5, I'm only doing it once, and I'm giving a little bit of aid with these 2 fingers here. I think that's very important. So we know that when we normally run a 12 gauge dry, one of the first things we do is what we call a combat load, and that means we feed the chamber first as priority, then feed the tube. In certain circumstances where the situation may change, I can at least break the shot on the one that's in the chamber. So that's why we always dominate by doing a combat reload, then feed the tube. On the lever gun, I'm not going to say don't do that, but what I'm going to tell you is it's a little bit different than a 12 gauge. We have a loader in here, and it's a little bit different than a 12 gauge. If you were going to combat load this, I would literally muzzle down, work that thing into the chamber area right there, close the gun. I like to drop the hammer and then feed the tube, and here's why. When my fingers are in this position and I start to feed the tube, a lot of guys will be hammer back on this. I don't really trust the safety on any of the guns. Some of them are disconnected on the Marlin style. On the Henry, there's not a safety in regards to something external. So the way I safe the gun is rolling a hammer. A lot of times what will happen is the student will start to load the gun, this will pop back out, and then all of a sudden the hand goes into the trigger area, the hammer's back, and you're going to end up sending one, and that's not good. So when I'm in this position, I like to load the tube now with the hammer in a forward configuration. So what I'm saying is, if you do prioritize the chamber, you really got to make sure that that round's going right into the chamber area and not getting lodged in here. Because what will happen is you'll come in, unlike a 12 gauge, the shell will fall like this, and then you're going to bind the gun, and that's going to cause an issue. So if you don't combat load the gun, what's your other option? Your other option would be you, in this configuration right here, your hammer's back, there's nothing in the tube. I would feed that, cycle the gun, hammer forward, then start feeding the tube like we already discussed. This is probably the best method in order to kind of keep you out of trouble from binding that round in the chamber area. Let's talk about working the action on the gun. There's a few different ways to do this. We see that if a person rolls the entire lever down and forward and back and down and forward and back, you'll start to introduce malfunctions to the gun. You'll bind it. This gun wants to basically, this lever needs to go straight forward and back, straight forward and back. This does a couple things. One, it increases reliability. 2, it's faster. And what I'm talking about is the subtlety of I'm in this position and I roll the bottom of the loop right here and I roll it back, throw my thumb over the top, break the shot, roll it down, bring it back, break the shot. And a lot of times guys will start taking their thumb and they'll place it on this side of the gun. So a couple things here, and I'm going to come back to that one in a second. What we're wanting to do is kick the lever from this position right here, forward, back, forward, back, forward, back, forward, back, forward, back. Now you'll notice for me, unless I'm only going to fire one shot, I don't put my thumb on this side of the gun when I'm running it, if I'm going to run it fast. To me, it takes time, and the reason why is my thumb's crossed over. I break the shot, I move it out of the way, throw the lever forward, I come back, throw the thumb back over the side, break the shot, move my thumb, kick it out, back in, regrip the gun and fire, okay? A lot, at least for me, most of the pressure I'm utilizing with this hand right here. I've got a good firm spot, and I'll talk about that in a recoil management segment. But for me, this my left hand's doing a lot of work. So what I like to do, if I'm running at speed, then I like to have the gun in this position right here, break the shot, leave the thumb on the right side of the gun, kick it forward, back, break the shot, forward, back, break the shot, forward, back, break the shot. So I'm not moving my thumb back and forth because that's costing me time. Something to consider. The next thing we're going to talk about is how to manage recoil, especially if you're dealing with 45-70, 30-30, or any of the more magnum style or rifle style calibers. Your pistol calibers you can get away with a lot. Shooting 357, shooting 44 Magnum in these styles of guns are very forgiving. You know, you're not needing to worry about running muzzle brakes or anything like that. The guns that I run muzzle brakes on are generally pushing 500 grainers, doing about 13 to 1400 feet per second, and for me that's enough. Everybody's different. Hornady makes a 325, and out of those guns I'm doing 17-18. Now that's a 16-inch barrel gun. That round was primarily designed to go out of a 22-inch barrel, and usually you're pushing about close to 2,000 feet per second. So recoil management on those calibers, there's some things that I like to do to manage recoil. Everybody's slightly different, so I'll just give you a couple tips of specifically of what I like to do when handling bigger calibers. So this is a non-ported gun. Okay, this is an 18-inch Henry. I chose this so there was no advantage for me as a shooter. The rounds that I'm using are about 1250, so they're not the hottest of the rounds, but this gives you a good idea. My 500 grainers I don't really want to waste for this demo because they're very expensive to load, but nonetheless, for some of you guys, you're used to probably handling magnum calibers. You're used to handling big things like I am. I'm a small guy from the waist up, so I'll show you some techniques and how to handle something that's a little bit bigger. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to extend the gun out with just this wrist right here. I'm going to hold the gun in this position and I'm going to fire that shot. Okay, you can see a little bit of recoil, a little bit of movement, but not a lot. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this out in front of me. Okay, so instead of just putting a lot of dominance on this wrist right here and technique, I'm going to utilize this as well. So for me, I like to come in, cheek the gun, but I'm going to extend it out for this demo and I'm going to fire it. Okay, you can see that with a little bit of forward drive on that hand right here, the gun's not moving back, it's not kicking into my shoulder. Okay, so I've shot it with just one hand. I employ two hands, nothing on the chest, right? But that's not the way we want to shoot this gun. We want to make sure that we've got a good purchase on the accelerator pad to the chest. So what I'm going to do is I've got a little bit of a forward drive, but most is pulled to the rear. This differs a little bit than a 12 gauge shotgun, because typically on a 12 gauge shotgun, especially if I'm running, whether it's a semi-auto or whether it's a 870 or a Mossberg, doesn't matter. Usually what we're doing is there's a little bit of rearward pressure, but there's a forward drive when we break the shots. On this, I tend to eat more of the recoil, and it's because this hand's constantly working that lever. Whereas on a 12 gauge, this hand's working the pump. So when we throw it in a forward position, we generally have just enough purchase on the chest area, throw it in a forward position, break the shot. So there's not a lot of abuse going into the chest area. For me, like I was telling you, in working this lever, trying to work it quickly, I have a little bit more rearward pressure. So I do treat this gun a little bit different than I treat a 12 gauge. So just something to consider. Now I'm going to put everything together. I'm going to have a little bit of English on this hand, a little bit of forward drive with my left hand, a good purchase on my chest area right here. And you'll note that I'm not shooting off the rotator cuff. Okay, there's not a lot of meat here. There's just kind of tendons, and for everybody, you may not be a bigger statured person, but generally if we can move that buttstock somewhat centered here on the chest, the body will absorb it a lot better. So we'll see what we got.